The Trump administration has announced that it is cutting off tens of millions of dollars in federal funding for Los Angeles' homeless services, a move that has reignited debate over how California has handled its homelessness crisis for years. Supporters of the decision argue that despite billions of taxpayer dollars being poured into homelessness programs, the situation on the streets has only continued to deteriorate.
The original promise seemed straightforward. Invest more money, expand services, and help people leave homelessness behind. Yet, after years of unprecedented spending, many Americans are asking where that money actually went. California has received enormous amounts of federal assistance, but the visible results have been difficult to find, leaving taxpayers across the country demanding answers about accountability, oversight, and whether these programs have truly helped the people they were intended to serve.
The focus of much of the criticism has been the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, commonly known as LAHSA, which reportedly received nearly $1 billion in federal funding over the past 5 years. At the same time, California's own audit revealed that the state spent roughly $24 billion on homelessness and housing programs over a similar period, while failing to effectively measure outcomes or track meaningful progress. Federal officials claim they uncovered repeated false statements, poor financial management, weak internal controls, and insufficient safeguards against conflicts of interest within the agency. As investigations expand, the federal government has intensified its scrutiny of organizations handling public funds, arguing that taxpayer money cannot continue flowing to agencies accused of mismanagement without stronger accountability.
The controversy extends beyond one agency. Critics argue that California has become the center of numerous investigations involving alleged fraud in areas ranging from homeless services to immigration programs, hospice care, and nonprofit organizations. Many residents believe they are paying higher taxes while receiving fewer results, and people across the United States are questioning why billions of federal dollars continue to be directed toward programs that appear unable to demonstrate measurable success. They argue that taxpayers from states thousands of miles away should not be expected to finance programs that allegedly fail to improve conditions on the ground, while homelessness continues to remain highly visible throughout major California cities. Supporters of the funding cuts also point to growing concern among local governments themselves. Los Angeles County has already withdrawn funding from LAHSA, while the city of Los Angeles has reportedly considered similar action. Federal officials argue that continuing to send billions of taxpayer dollars to an organization under investigation does little to reduce homelessness, and may instead divert resources away from programs that are producing real results. Their position is that funding ineffective organizations ultimately harms those in need by reducing the amount of money available for nonprofits and shelters that have established records of helping vulnerable individuals transition off the streets. The debate has also highlighted broader questions surrounding California's housing policies. Some commentators argue that while homelessness is often linked to soaring housing costs, the state has also invested heavily in building housing specifically for homeless residents, with reports indicating that some taxpayer-funded units remain vacant, despite thousands of people living on the streets. Critics contend that if completed housing remains unused, then the issue extends beyond simply constructing additional buildings. They argue that underlying challenges involving mental health, addiction, public safety, and program management must also be addressed, rather than assuming that increased spending alone will solve the crisis. Federal officials defending the funding suspension argue that organizations accused of repeated financial mismanagement should not continue receiving taxpayer money until accountability has been restored. They compare the situation to any private individual or business repeatedly failing audits, arguing that most people would stop providing financial support under similar circumstances. Critics say government agencies should be held to the same standard as everyone else, especially when billions of public dollars are involved. They believe the real tragedy is that resources intended to help struggling individuals may never reach them because of administrative failures, poor oversight, or alleged misuse of funds. Not everyone agrees with the decision. Leaders from organizations serving homeless populations warn that abruptly cutting funding could create additional hardship for vulnerable people. Even those who acknowledge the current system is deeply flawed caution against changes that might unintentionally reduce access to shelter beds, outreach services, or emergency assistance. some nonprofit leaders have openly stated that the existing model is not working and that significant reform is necessary. But they also stress that any transition must ensure that people experiencing homelessness do not suffer further during the restructuring process. This reflects a growing consensus that while accountability is essential, reforms must also protect those who genuinely depend on these services.
LAHSA has defended itself against the allegations, stating that it has already corrected or is in the process of correcting nearly all of the issues identified by federal investigators. Critics, however, argue that promises of future improvements are insufficient when billions of dollars have already been spent without delivering clear results. They believe organizations seeking continued public funding should demonstrate proven performance before receiving additional taxpayer support, rather than asking for more resources while investigations remain ongoing. This disagreement has become one of the central political battles surrounding homelessness policy in California.
Beyond homelessness itself, the controversy has fueled broader criticism of California's governance. Despite being home to Silicon Valley, Hollywood, world-renowned universities, major ports, and one of the largest economies in the world, critics argue that state spending has grown dramatically without producing corresponding improvements in public services. Government expenditures have risen far faster than population growth, while the number of public employees has also increased substantially. Opponents question whether taxpayers are receiving better government in return for this expansion, pointing to persistent problems involving housing affordability, public safety, infrastructure, and homelessness as evidence that higher spending alone has not translated into better outcomes.
Housing remains at the center of the discussion. Analysts note that California has approved far fewer new housing units than many comparable metropolitan regions, despite continuing population pressures. Limited housing construction has contributed to soaring home prices and rising rents, making it increasingly difficult for middle-class families to remain in the state. At the same time, critics argue that homelessness cannot be explained solely by housing costs when publicly funded housing units remain unoccupied and billions continue flowing into programs with disputed effectiveness. As federal investigations continue and funding decisions evolve, the central question remains unchanged. How can taxpayer dollars be managed in a way that genuinely reduces homelessness, strengthens accountability, and ensures that resources reach the people who need them most, rather than being lost within an ineffective system?